The Junkers Ju-88 was a German World War II Luftwaffe twin-engined multi-role combat aircraft. Designed by Junkers Flugzeug and Motorenwerke in the mid-1930s to be a so-called Schnellbomber which would be too fast for any of the fighters of its era to intercept, it suffered from a number of technical problems during the later stages of its development and early operational roles, but became one of the most versatile combat aircraft of the war. Like a number of other Luftwaffe bombers, it was used successfully as a bomber, dive bomber, night fighter, torpedo bomber, reconnaissance aircraft, heavy fighter and even, during the closing stages of the conflict in Europe, as a flying bomb. Despite its protracted development, the aircraft became one of the Luftwaffe's most important assets. The assembly line ran constantly from 1936 to 1945, and more than 16,000 Ju-88s were built in dozens of variants, more than any other twin-engine German aircraft of the period. Throughout the production, the basic structure of the aircraft remained unchanged. Design and development: the Ju-85 was a twin-engine bomber aircraft prototype, designed by Junkers in 1935. The Reich Air Ministry requested the aircraft, which differed from the Ju-88 due to the use of a twin fin-tail unit. The aircraft was never put into service. In August 1935, the German Ministry of Aviation submitted its requirements for an unmanned, three-seat, high-speed bomber, with a payload of 800-1000 kg. Junkers presented their initial design in June 1936, and were given clearance to build two prototypes. The first two aircraft were to have a range of 2,000 km and were to be powered by two DB600s. Three further aircraft, work number 4943, 4944 and 4945, were to be powered by Jumo 211 engines. The first two prototypes, Ju-88 V1 and V2, differed from the V3, V4 and V5 in that the latter three models were equipped with three defensive armament positions to the rear of the cockpit, and were able to carry two 1,000 kg bombs, one under each inner wing panel. The first five prototypes had conventionally operating dual-stride leg rearwards retracting main gear, but starting with the V6 prototype, a main gear design debuted that twisted the new, single-leg main gear strut through 90 degrees during the retraction sequence, much like that of the American Curtiss P-40 Warhawk fighter. This feature allowed the main wheels to end up above the lower end of the strut when fully retracted and was adopted as standard for all future production Ju-88s, and only minimally modified for the later Ju-188 and 388 developments of it. These single-leg landing gear struts also made use of stacks of conical Belleville washers inside them, as their main form of suspension for takeoffs and landings. By 1938, radical modifications from the first prototype began to produce a heavy dive bomber. The wings were strengthened, dive brakes were added, the fuselage was extended and the number of crewmen was increased to 4. Due to these advances, the Ju-88 was to enter the war as a medium bomber. The choice of annular radiators for engine cooling on the Ju-88, which placed these radiators immediately forward of each engine and directly behind each propeller, allowed the cooling lines for the engine coolant and oil cooling radiators to be just about as short as possible. The concept may have led to a number of other German military aircraft designs adopting the same solution, such as the Arado R-240, Heinkel He-177, Heinkel He-219, the inline-powered developments of the Focke-Wulf FW-190 and the twin-engined Focke-Wulf TAR-154. The aircraft's first flight was made by the prototype Ju-88 V1, which bore the civil registration DAQEN, on December 21, 1936. When it first flew, it managed about 580 km/h and Hermann Gar paragraph ring, head of the Luftwaffe was ecstatic. It was an aircraft that could finally fulfill the promise of the Schnellbomber, a high-speed bomber. The streamlined fuselage was modeled after its contemporary, the Dornier Do-17, but with fewer defensive guns because the belief still held that it could outrun late 1930s-era fighters. The fifth prototype set a 1,000 km closed-circuit record in March 1939, carrying a 2,000 kg payload at a speed of 517 km/h. However, By the time Luftwaffe planners like Ernst Udet had their opportunities to their own pet features added, the Ju-88's top speed had dropped to around 450 km/h. The Ju-88 V7 was fitted with cable-cutting equipment to combat the potential threat of British barrage balloons, and was successfully tested in this role. The V7 then had the Ju-88A1 Beetle's eye faceted nose glazing installed, complete with the bowler under-a-nose ventral defensive machine gun emplacement, and was put through a series of dive bombing tests with 250 kg and 500 kg bombs, and in early 1940, with 1,000 kg bombs. The Ju-88 V8 flew on 3 October 1938. The AO series was developed through the V9 and V10 prototypes. The A1 series prototypes were WRKNRS 0003, 0004 and 0005. The A1s were given the JUMO 211B1 or G powerplants. Dr. Heinrich Koppenberg assured GAR Paragraph Ring in the autumn of 1938 that 300 Ju-88s per month was definitely possible. GAR Paragraph Ring was in favor of the A1 variant for mass production. Production was delayed drastically by developmental problems. Although planned for a service introduction in 1938, the Ju-88 finally entered squadron service on the first day of the attack on Poland in 1939. Production was painfully slow, with only one Ju-88 manufactured per week, as problems continually kept cropping up. The Ju-88C series of heavy fighter was also designed very early in 1940, but kept secret from GAR Paragraph Ring, as he only wanted bombers. Versatility and operational development, dive bomber. In October 1937 General Luftwaffe Ernst Udet had ordered the development of the Ju-88 as a heavy dive bomber. This decision was influenced by the success of the Ju-87 Stuka in this role. The Junkers Development Center at Dessau gave priority to the study of pull-out systems and dive brakes. The first prototype to be tested as a dive bomber was the Ju-88 V4 followed by the V5 and V6. These models became the planned prototype for the A1 series. The V5 made its maiden flight on April 13, 1938, and the V6 on June 28, 1938. Both the V5 and V6 were fitted with four-blade propellers, an extra bomb bay and a central control system. As a dive bomber, the Ju-88 was capable of pinpoint deliveries of heavy loads. However, despite all the modifications, dive bombing still proved too stressful for the airframe, and in 1943, tactics were changed so the bombs were delivered from a shallower, 45-degree diving angle. Aircraft and bomb sights were accordingly modified and dive brakes were removed. With an advanced UV dive bomb sight, accuracy remained very good for its time. Maximum bomb load of the A4 was 3,000 kg, but in practice, standard bomb load was 1,500–2,000 kg. Junkers later used the A4 airframe for the A-17 torpedo carrier. However, the variant lacked the under-a-nose bowler gondola for a ventral gun position. Fighter bomber, the Ju-88C series of standard fighter bomber versions from the C2 onwards culminated in the Ju-88 C6, applying experience acquired with the A4 bomber, equipped with the same JUMO 211J engines but replacing the Beetle's eye nose glazing with a smoothly curved all-metal nose, pierced only by the barrels of its forward-firing offensive armament. The C6 was used mostly as fighter bomber and therefore assigned to bomber units. As a reaction to the increasing number of attacks on German shipping, especially on U-boats in the Bay of Biscay, from July 1942 it started flying anti-shipping patrols and escort missions from bases in France v/Kampfgeschwader 40 being formed to operate the C6. The aircraft of Volt per kilogram 40 were a significant threat to the anti-submarine aircraft and operated as escort fighters for the more vulnerable Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor maritime patrol bombers. Between July 1942 and July 1944, the Ju-88s of KG-40 and ZG-1 were credited with 109 confirmed air-to-air victories, at a cost of 117 losses. They were finally deployed against the Allied invasion of Normandy in June 1944, incurring heavy losses for little effect before being disbanded on August 5, 1944. Attack bomber, The Ju-88P was a specialized variant for ground attack and to function as a bomber-destroyer, designed starting from 1942 and produced in small numbers, using examples of the Bore-Cannon heavy-caliber aviation autocannon series which required the omission of the bowler under a nose gondola for clearance. The prototype, derived from a standard Ju-88A4, was armed with a 7.5 cm anti-tank gun derived from the 7.5 cm PaK-40 installed in a large conformal gun pod under the fuselage. This was followed by a small batch of Ju-88P1, which standardized the solid sheet metal nose of the C version for all known examples of the P series, and used the new 7.5 cm PaK-40L semi-automatic gun, also known as the Bore-Cannon BK-7-5, which was also meant for use in the later Henschel HS-129B3 dedicated anti-armor aircraft. The Ju-88P1 was produced in some 40 units, but with the massive cannon installation resulting in a slow and vulnerable aircraft, it was soon replaced by the Ju-88P2, featuring two Bore-Cannon 3.7 cm BK-3, 7 guns, whose higher muzzle velocity proved useful against the Russian tanks in the Eastern Front. This aircraft was used by Aproban's Commando 25. The Ju-88P3 also used the twin BK-3, 7 guns, and added further armor for the crew, and was delivered at one Staffel of the Nachschlaggruppe in 1, 2, 4, 8 and 9 for night attacks in the Eastern Front, in northern Norway and Italy. Finally, the Ju-88P4 mounted a smaller volume ventral gun pod housing a 5 cm auto-loading Bore-Cannon BK-5 cannon and, in some cases, 6.5 cm solid propellant rockets. Heavy fighter and night fighter, Ju-88C. The Ju-88C was originally intended as a fighter-bomber and heavy fighter by adding fixed, forward-firing guns to the nose while retaining some bomb-carrying ability of the A-series bomber. The C-series had a solid metal nose, and retained the A-series style vertical tail, as well as the ventral bowler gondola under the crew compartment, although this was sometimes removed at unit level in order to reduce weight and drag and thus enhance aircraft performance. The Ju-88C was later used as a night fighter and this became its main role. The first night fighter version of the Ju-88 was the C-2, based on the A-1 and armed with 120 mm GFF cannon and three 7.92 mm G-17 machine guns placed in a new metal nose. These examples entered service in the paragraph rear Staffel of KG-30 and the unit was renamed to /NJG-1 in July 1940. The C-6B version was the C-6 paragraph rear plane equipped with FUG 202 Liechtenstein BC low UHF brand airborne intercept radar, using the complex 32 dipole matrix antennas. The first 4 C-6B fighters were tested in early 1942 by NJG-1. The trials were successful and the aircraft was ordered into production. In October 1943, many C-6Bs were upgraded with new radar systems. The first new radar equipment was the FUG 212 Liechtenstein C-1, followed in 1944 by the VHF band FUG 220 Liechtenstein SN-2. Many Ju-88Cs had their bowler gondolas modified to hold up to 3 forward-firing machine guns or cannon. The rear gondola gun position being eliminated. In addition, several night fighters were equipped with 2 Currency GE Music upward-firing 20 mm cannon in trial fittings, and from mid-1943 onward, there was an official field modification kit available for this arrangement. A small number of the C-Series day fighters had their new solid metal noses specially painted to resemble the Bomber A-Series Beetle's eye-faceted clear-view nose glazing, in an attempt to deceive Allied pilots into thinking the fighters were actually bombers. The unusual camouflage attempt did result initially in a number of Allied aerial losses. Ju-88R. The Ju-88R series night fighters were basically versions of the Ju-88 C6 powered by BMW 801 radial engines. The A1 had 1,560 PS BMW 801L engines and the A2 had 1,700 PS BMW 801 G2 engines. One of the first aircraft from the A1 series that went into service was involved in one of the most significant defections which the Luftwaffe suffered. On May 9, 1943, this night fighter, which was stationed with 10/NJG-3 in Aalborg, Denmark, flew to the RAF station at Dis with its entire crew and complete electronic equipment on board. The fact that Spitfire VB Fighters No. 165 Squadron escorted it towards the end of its flight could indicate that its arrival had been expected. It was immediately transferred to Farnborough Airfield, received RAF markings and serial, and was tested in great detail. The preserved aircraft is on exhibit at the RAF Museum, as one of the first two intact Ju-88s in aviation museums. The Luftwaffe only learned of this defection the following month when members of the crew, pilot Oberleutnant Heinrich Schmidt, son of the then Secretary to the Ministry for Foreign Affairs Gustav Stresemann, and Oberfeldwebel Paul Rosenberger made broadcasts on British radio. The third crew member, Eric Cantwell, refused to cooperate with the British and was treated as a normal prisoner of war. Ju-88G, all previous night fighter versions of the Ju-88 used a modified A-series fuselage. The G-series fuselage was purpose-built for the special needs of a night fighter, with the A-series bowler ventral undernose defensive gun position omitted for lower aerodynamic drag and less weight, and adding the enlarged squared-off vertical fin rudder tail unit of the Ju-188. G-1 aircraft possessed more powerful armament and, like the earlier A-1, used a pair of 1,700 PS BMW 801 radial engines, the G1 using the later BMW 801 G2 version. Electronic equipment consisted of the then-standard FUG 220 Liechtenstein SN290 MHz VHF radar using 8 dipole Hirschgui antennas, plus sometimes additional FUG 350 Naxos with its antenna in a teardrop-shaped fairing above the canopy, or FUG 227 Flensburg radar detector homing devices that had their own trio of twin dipole antennae, one on each wing leading edge and one under the tail. One Ju-88G1 of 7. Starflyn JG2 was flown by mistake to RAF Woodbridge in July 1944, giving the Royal Air Force its first chance to check out the VHF-band Liechtenstein SN2 radar and Flensburg radar detector gear. G6 versions were equipped with 1,750 PS Jumo 213A inline V12 engines, enlarged fuel tanks and often 1 or 2 20mm G151/20 cannons in a Shree-currency GE Music installation. These guns were pointed obliquely upwards and forwards from the upper fuselage, usually at an angle of 70 degrees. Some of the final G-series models received updates to the engines, using a pair of high-altitude Jumo 213E inverted V12s with revised annular radiators, or to the radar, FUG 218-ton VO or the even newer FUG 240 Berlin N1 cavity magnetron-based, 3A GHZ band radar. Only about 15 of the Berlin systems were completed before VE Day. Many Luftwaffe night fighter aces, such as Helmut Blendt and Heinrich von Unzuse and Wittgenstein flew Ju-88s during their careers. The Imperial Japanese Navy ordered the specifications of an anti-submarine patrol escort fleet aircraft, based on a medium bomber. Kaya-Shah closely patterned the Kaya-Shah Q-1W Tokai anti-submarine patrol fleet escort aircraft after the Ju-88. Operational history: Polish campaign, only 12 Ju-88 saw action in Poland. The unit Probanskommando 88 was responsible for testing new bomber designs and their crews under hostile conditions. They selected 12 aircraft and their crews and attached them to 1/Kampfgeschwader 25. As a result of its small operational numbers, the type made no impact. Battle of Norway, the Luftwaffe committed 2/Kampfgeschwader 30 to the campaign under Ex-Fliegerkorps for Operation Weser 1/4 Bung. The unit was equipped with Ju-88s and engaged Allied shipping as its main target. On April 9, 1940, Ju-88s of KG-30 dive-bombed, in cooperation with high-level bombing Heinkel He-111s of KG-26, and helped damage the battleship HMSA Rodney and sink the destroyer HMSA Gurkha. However, the unit lost 4 Ju-88s in the action, the highest single loss of the aircraft in combat throughout the campaign. Battle of France. The Luftwaffe's order of battle for the French campaign reveals all but one of the Luftwaffe's Fliegerkorps contained Ju-88s in the combat role. The mixed bomber units, including the Ju-88, of Kampfgeschwader 51 helped claim between 233 and 248 Allied aircraft on the ground between 10 May 13, 1940. The Ju-88 was particularly effective at dive bombing. Between 13 May 24, Iron 2/KG-54 flew 174 attack against rail systems, paralyzing French logistics and mobility. On June 17, 1940, Junkers Ju-88s destroyed a 10,000-ton ship, the 16,243 GRT ocean liner RMSA Lancastria, off St. Nazaire, killing some 5,800 Allied personnel. Some 133 Ju-88s were pressed into the blitzkrieg, but very high combat losses and accidents forced a quick withdrawal from action to retrain crews to fly this very high-performance aircraft. Some crews were reported to be more scared of the Ju-88 than the enemy, and requested a transfer to an He-111 unit. By this time, major performance deficiencies in the A-1 led to an all-out effort in a major design rework. The outcome was a longer, 20.08 am wingspan, from extended rounded wingtips that had already been standardized on the A-4 version, that was deemed needed for all A-1s. Thus the A-5 was born. Surviving A-1s were modified as quickly as possible, with new wings to A-5 specifications. Battle of Britain. By August 1940, A-1s and A-5s were reaching operational units, just as the battle was intensifying. The Battle of Britain proved very costly. Its higher speed did not prevent Ju-88 losses exceeding those of its Dornier Do-17 and He-111 stablemates, despite being deployed in smaller numbers than either. Ju-88 losses over Britain in 1940 amount to 313 machines between July–October 1940. One notable incident involved ground fighting between the crew of an A-1 and soldiers from the London Irish Rifles during the Battle of Graveney-Marsh on September 27, 1940. It was the last action between British and foreign military forces on British mainland soil. Do-17 and He-111 losses for the same period amounted to 132 and 252 machines destroyed respectively. A series of field kits were made to make it less vulnerable, including the replacement of the single MG-15 rear machine gun by a twin-barreled MG-81Z machine gun, and additional cockpit armor. It was during the closing days of the Battle of Britain that the flagship Ju-88A4 went into service. Although slower yet than the A-1, nearly all of the troubles of the A-1 were gone, and finally the Ju-88 matured into a superb warplane. The A-4 actually saw additional improvements including more powerful engines, but, unlike other aircraft in the Luftwaffe, did not see a model code change. The Ju-88C series also benefited from the A-4 changes, and when the Luftwaffe finally did decide on a new heavy fighter, the Ju-88C was a powerful, refined aircraft. Eastern Front. By the summer of 1941, most of the units equipped with the Dornier Do-17 were upgrading to the Ju-88. With a few exceptions, most of the German bomber units were now flying the He-111 and Ju-88. The Ju-88 was to prove a very capable and valuable asset to the Luftwaffe in the East. The Ju-88 units met with instant success, attacking enemy airfields and positions at low level and causing enormous losses for little damage in return. 3. Kampfgeschwader 3 attacked Pinsk airfield in the morning of the 22nd June 1941. It caught, and claimed destroyed, 60 Soviet bombers on the ground. The 39 SBAP regiment of the 10 divisions had actually lost 43 Tupolev Spar and 5 Pitlyakov P2s. Ju-88s from Kampfgeschwader 51 destroyed over 100 aircraft after dispatching 80 Ju-88s to hit airfields. In general, the Soviet aircraft were not dispersed and the Luftwaffe found them easy targets. A report from the Soviet 23rd Tank Division of the 12th Armored Corps described a low-level attack by Ju-88s on June 22, resulting in the loss of 40 tanks. However, the Ju-88s were to suffer steady attritional losses. At 0415 on June 22, 1941, 3/KG-51 attacked the airfield at Kurovica. Despite destroying 34 Polikarpov I-153s, the Ju-88s were intercepted by 66 Shape I-153s. 6 Ju-88s were shot down before the German fighter escort dealt with the threat. By the end of the first day of the campaign, Ju-88 losses amounted to 23 destroyed. Due to the lack of sufficient numbers of Ju-87 Stukas, the Ju-88 was employed in the direct ground support role. This resulted in severe losses from ground fire. Kampfgeschwader 1, Kampfgeschwader 76 and Kampfgeschwader 77 reported the loss of 18 Ju-88s over enemy territory on June 23. KG-76 and KG-77 reported the loss of a further 4 Ju-88s, of which 12 were 100% destroyed. In the north, the VVS Northwestern Front lost 465 aircraft on the ground, 148 of them bombers, to the Ju-88s of KG-1. A further 33 were damaged. Out of a total of 1,720 aircraft deployed by the VVS Northern Front on June 22, it lost 890 and a further 187 suffered battle damage in 8 days. The Ju-88's units helped virtually destroy Soviet air power in the northern sector. Again, the Ju-88 demonstrated its dive bombing capability. Along with He-111s from KG-55, Ju-88s from KG-51 and 54 destroyed some 220 trucks and 40 tanks on July 1, which helped repulse the Soviet Southwestern Front's offensive. The Ju-88s destroyed most rail links during interdiction missions in the area, allowing Panzergruppe 1 to maintain the pace of its advance. Ju-88 units operating over the Baltic states during the Battle for Estonia inflicted severe losses on Soviet shipping, with the same dive bombing tactics used over Norway, France and Britain. KGR-806 sank the Soviet destroyer Karl Marx on August 8, 1941 in Loksa Bay, Tallinn. On August 28 the Ju-88s had more success when KG-77 and KGR-806 sank the 2026 GRT steamer Vironia, the 2317 GRT Lucerne, the 1423 GRT Attis Kranvals and the icebreaker Christianis Vormars. The rest of the Soviet fleet were forced to change course. This took them through a heavily mined area. As a result, 21 Soviet warships, including 5 destroyers, struck mines and sank. On August 29, the Ju-88s accounted for the transport ships Vtoraya Pyataletka, Kalpaks and Leningrad Soviet sunk. In addition, the ships Ivan Papanin, Saul, Kazakhstan and the Serpy Molot were damaged. Some 5,000 Soviet soldiers were lost. Finnish Air Force. In April 1943, as Finland was fighting its continuation war against the USSR, the Finnish Air Force bought 24 Ju-88s from Germany. The aircraft were used to equip No. 44 SQN, which had previously operated Bristol Blenheims, but these were instead transferred to No. 42 SQN. Due to the complexity of the Ju-88, most of 1943 was used for training the crews on the aircraft, and only a handful of bombing missions were undertaken. The most notable was a raid on the Lato partisan village on August 20, 1943, and a raid on the Lavansaari airfield. In the summer of 1943, the Finns noted stress damage on the wings. This had occurred when the aircraft were used in dive bombing. Restrictions followed, the dive brakes were removed and it was only allowed to dive at a 45-degree angle. In this way, they tried to spare the aircraft from unnecessary wear. One of the more remarkable missions was a bombing raid on March 9, 1944 against Soviet long-range aviation bases near Leningrad, when the Finnish aircraft, including Ju-88s, followed Soviet bombers returning from a night raid on Tallinn, catching the Soviets unprepared and destroying many Soviet bombers and their fuel reserves, and a raid against the Airasan base at Petsnijoki on March 22, 1944. The whole bomber regiment took part in the defense against the Soviets during the Fourth Strategic Offensive. All aircraft flew several missions per day, day and night, when the weather permitted. No. 44 SQN was subordinated Lento-Rimmer-Currency Sako during the Lapland War, and the Ju-88s were used both for reconnaissance and bombing. The targets were mostly vehicle columns. Reconnaissance flights were also made over northern Norway. The last war mission was flown on April 4, 1945. After the wars, Finland was prohibited from using bomber aircraft with internal bomb stores. Consequently, the Finnish Ju-88s were used for training until 1948. The aircraft were then scrapped over the following years. No Finnish Ju-88s have survived, but an engine is on display at the Central Finland Aviation Museum, and the frame structure of a German Ju-88 cockpit hood is preserved at the Finnish Aviation Museum in Vantaa. Variants: Ju-88A. Main bomber type with Jumo 211 engines. Ju-88AO, pre-production aircraft. Ju-88A1, initial production variant. 895 kW Jumo 211B1 engines, Ju-88A2, Jumo 211G1 engines. Ju-88A3, conversion trainer. Dual controls. Ju-88A4, improved variant. Longer span wings, due to rounded wingtips. Modified with new bomb-dropping equipment to produce a A-15 special bomber variant. The Ministry of Aviation refused to authorize mass production of the A-15, as the wooden bomb bay bulge caused too much drag and thus a reduction in speed. Ju-88A5, earlier models of Ju-88 upgraded with longer A4 wings and other equipment. Ju-88B, prototype with all-new fully glazed stepless crew compartment nose, developed into Junkers Ju-188. Ju-88BO, 10 pre-production aircraft with stepless fully glazed nose. Ju-88C, sister paragraph rare, fighter bomber and night fighter, based on A-series, but with sheet metal nose. Ju-88C1, heavy fighter, 20 converted from A1, Jumo 211 engines. Ju-88C2, heavy fighter, 20 converted from A5, Ju-88C3, heavy fighter with BMW engines, none built. Ju-88C4, heavy fighter, reconnaissance variant, based on A5. 60 built and 60 converted from A5, Ju-88C5, heavy fighter, like C4 but with BMW 801 engines, up to 4 converted. Ju-88C6, heavy fighter and night fighter, based on A4, Jumo 211J engines with 1420 picoseconds, 900 built. Ju-88D, long-range photo reconnaissance variants, based on the Ju-88A4. Ju-88D1, long-range photo reconnaissance variant based on Ju-88A4. Ju-88D2, long-range photo reconnaissance variant based on Ju-88A5. Ju-88D3, tropicalized long-range photo reconnaissance variant based on Ju-88A4. Ju-88D4, tropicalized long-range photo reconnaissance variant based on Ju-88A5. Ju-88D5, Ju-88G, night fighter, new fuselage with A-series ventral bowler gondola omitted, tail section from Ju-188, aerodynamically improved conformal gun pod for a quartet of forward-firing 20 caliber, MG 151/20 autocannons below the former bomb bay. Ju-88G1, BMW 801 radial engines with 1700 picoseconds, FUG 220 Liechtenstein SN2 radar, Ju-88G6, Junkers Jumo 213A inverted V12 engines with 1750 picoseconds, used either FUG 220 Liechtenstein SN2 90 MHz or FUG 218 ton 158 187 MHz frequency radar either with the usual Hirschgau IA dipole aerial setup or experimentally with the more aerodynamic Morgenstern tripled cross dipole aerials. Some very late war aircraft equipped with experimental FUG 240 Berlin cavity magnetron-based 3 GHz radar, with dish antenna in bulbous solid nose. Optional with recurrency GE Music upward-firing guns with two 20mm or 30mm guns. Ju-88G7, identical to G6, but with Jumo 213E high-altitude engines, planned for use with FUG 218/220 with Morgenstern array or FUG 240. The G7 was also to be installed with wings from the Junkers Ju-188. Ju-88 G3, 4 and 8 not produced. Ju-88H, long-range photo reconnaissance, fighter variants, based on the stretched Ju-88G series fuselage. Ju-88H1, long-range maritime reconnaissance variant. Ju-88H2, fighter variant. Ju-88H3, long-range maritime reconnaissance variant. Ju-88H4, fighters variant. Ju-88P, anti-tank and anti-bomber variant with single-ball cannon series 75mm, 50mm, or twin 37mm caliber cannon in conformal ventral fuselage gun pod mount, which mandated removal of the bowler gondola under the cockpit section, conversion of A-series bomber. Produced in small series only, they were perceived as a failure for both anti-tank and anti-bomber use. Ju-88P1, heavy gun variant fitted with single 75mm bore cannon BK7, 5 cannon in ventral gun pod. Appeared in mid-1942 in small numbers. Ju-88P2, heavy gun variant with twin 37mm bore cannon BK37 cannon in ventral gun pod. Ju-88P3, heavy gun variant with twin 37mm bore cannon BK37 cannon in ventral gun pod, and additional armor. Ju-88P4, heavy gun variant with single 50mm bore cannon BK5 cannon in ventral gun pod. There were 32 built. Ju-88P5, heavy gun variant with single 88mm, Ju-88R, C-series night fighters with BMW 801 engines. Ju-88S, high-speed bomber series based on Ju-88A4 but with ventral bowler gondola omitted, smoothly glazed nose with radial rib supports instead of the Beetle's eye of the A version, and GM1 nitrous oxide boost, fastest of all variants. Ju-88SO, fitted with two BMW 801 G2 engines, single 13mm dorsal gun and 14 SD-65 bombs. Ju-88S1, fitted with two BMW 801 G2 engines, the GM1 boost system and could carry two South Dakota, 1,000 kg bombs externally. Ju-88S2, fitted with two turbocharged BMW 801J engines, wooden bomb bay extension as used on the Ju-88A15. Ju-88S3, fitted with two 1,671 kW Jumo 213A engines and GM1 boost system. Ju-88T, 3-seat photo reconnaissance version of S-series. Ju-88T1, based on the Ju-88S1 but with bomb bays fitted for extra fuel of GM1 tanks. Ju-88T3, based on the Ju-88S3. Operators: A Bulgaria, Bulgarian Air Force, A Finland, Finnish Air Force received 24 Ju-88A4 aircraft. Number 44 Squadron. A France, Arma copyright de l'air operated aircraft captured in Toulouse repaired depot and other captured by the RAF and USAAF handed over to the French. French Navy, A Germany, Luftwaffe, A Hungary, Royal Hungarian Air Force, an Italy, Regia Aeronautica, A Romania, Royal Romanian Air Force, A United Kingdom, Royal Air Force, number 1426 Flight RAF operated at least 5 captured aircraft. A Soviet Union, Soviet Air Force operated captured aircraft. A Spanish state, Spanish Air Force bought 10 aircraft and put into service another 15 in turn during the war. Survivors: only 2 complete aircraft exist. They were both flown into British hands by defecting crews during the war. Ju-88D1/Trop, Workenhof 430,650. This is a long-range, photographic reconnaissance aircraft that was in the service of the Romanian Air Force. On July 22, 1943, it was flown to Cyprus by a Romanian pilot who wanted to defect to the British forces on the island. 4 Hurricanes from No. 127 Squadron escorted it to the airfield at Tobruk. Given the name Bakshish, it was allocated the RAF serial number HK959 and test a Euro flown in Egypt. However, by this point in the war, The RAF had already acquired 3 Ju-88s in flying condition, and bakshish was handed over to the U.S. Army Air Force, who flew it across the South Atlantic to Wright Field. In the U.S., it was registered as FE-1598 and used for examination and test flying from 1943 to 1944. In 1946 the aircraft was placed in storage at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona. It was shipped to the U.S. Air Force Museum on January 6, 1960. It was previously painted in spurious Luftwaffe markings, appropriately of a German WW2AUFKLA currency Ranksgruppe, while on unrestored, outdoor display. However, it is presently finished in its original style Romanian military insignia and is on protected indoor display in the World War II Gallery at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. Ju-88-01, Work NR 360043. This aircraft is thought to have been built in Mida 1942 as a Model A bomber, before being converted to a Model Ra 1 fighter in early 1943. It was flown to Scotland by its defecting crew in May 1943. 2 of the 3 crew on board had taken the decision to defect after being ordered to shoot down a civilian BOAC Mosquito courier flight from Sweden to the UK. The aircraft took off from Aalborg, Denmark on May 9, landing at Kristiansand, Norway for refueling. It then took off again, supposedly for a mission over the Skagerrak. The defecting crew instead flew west to Scotland while holding the 3rd crew member at gunpoint. The aircraft was detected by British radar as it approached the Scottish coast, and 2 Spitfires from 165 Squadron were scrambled. They intercepted 360,043 1 mile inland, whereupon the Ju-88 lowered its undercarriage, waggled its wings and dropped flares, signaling the crew's intent to surrender. The Spitfires escorted 360,043 to RAF, where it received slight damage from the airfield's anti-aircraft guns while attempting to land. The Spitfire pilots were mentioned in dispatches for taking the risk not to open fire on the Ju-88 upon interception. The capture of this aircraft was of great intelligence value at the time, as it was fitted with the latest UHF Bannfug 202 Liechtenstein BCAI radar, for which a new form of the window radar interference method, set up for UHF brand airborne radar jamming, was developed soon afterwards. The Ju-88-01 was operated by the RAF's No. 1426 flight and evaluated in depth by various British groups, including the Royal Aircraft Establishment and the Fighter Interception Unit. It was used to assist in teaching enemy aircraft recognition skills prior to the D-Day landings, and was last flown in May 1945. In September 1954 and again in September 1955, it was displayed on Horse Guards Parade for Battle of Britain Week. The aircraft was restored in 1975 and fitted with a replica of its characteristic Matrates 32 dipole radar antenna array, as all its radar equipment had been removed during the war. In August 1978 moved to the RAF Museum, its present home. Several reasonably intact aircraft have been recovered from underwater and remote land crash sites in recent years. Some of these aircraft are under restoration for static display. Notable examples include, Ju-88A1, Work NR 0880119, with G-Schwade at Nung of U4+TK. This aircraft is the subject of a long-term restoration project at the Norwegian Armed Forces Aircraft Collection at Gardermoen, near Oslo, Norway. It first flew in January 1940 and served with 2 Staffelkampf G-Schwade 30, under the call sign U4+TK during Operation Weser 1 Quarterbung, the German invasion of Norway. In April 1940, it was operating from the frozen surface of the Jonsvatnet, a lake near Trondheim in Norway. The lake was being used as an improvised airfield by the Germans, who were conducting operations against and Allied naval ships and against the towns of Namsos and Narvik towards the end of April. Warmer weather made the frozen lake surface unusable for flying operations, and a number of aircraft were abandoned on the ice, sinking into the lake when it melted completely. The Ju-88 was recovered in late 2003, in an operation that also saw the recovery of a Heinkel 111 and the tail section of a second Ju-88. Ju-88A4, Work NR 088147884D+AM, This aircraft is displayed at the Norsk Luftfartsmuseum, the Norwegian Aviation Museum at Bodø Airport. On 13 April 1942, it was returning from an attack on Soviet ships when it ran out of fuel. The crew bailed out in the vicinity of Sneed, but the aircraft continued its flight and, remarkably, was left comparatively intact after crash landing on a hillside at Gardivar in Finnmark in the far north of Norway. It remained there until recovered by the Norsk Luftfartsmuseum in 1988. Ju-88A5, work NR 0886146 with stamp Kennzeichen of CV plus VP, this aircraft is held at the Deutsches Technikmuseum near Berlin. It was delivered to the Luftwaffe in June 1940 and assigned to the bomber unit Kampfgeschwader 54, who flew it in the Battle of Britain and during the German invasion of the Soviet Union. By June 1942, it was serving with a training unit, Kampfliegerausheil 3 based on the German Baltic coast. On the night of 29 June, it was stolen by 2 German personnel who intended to fly to Britain and defect to the Allied side. The attempt failed and the aircraft came down in Killard, a fjord near Krigera, Norway. One man drowned but the other, Willy Voss, was rescued by Norwegian civilians. However, he was subsequently captured, returned to Germany and executed in January 1943, even though some accounts claim Voss was forced by the other man to fly at gunpoint. The aircraft flew was recovered in August 2000. Restoration work was carried out in Norway between 2000 and 2004. It was moved to Germany in August 2006. Specifications: Ju-88A4, the definitive bomber version. Data from General Characteristics, Crew, 4, Length, 14.36 meters, Wingspan, 20.08 m, Height, 5.07 m, Wing Area, 54.7 m2, Loaded weight, 8,550 kilograms, max takeoff weight, 14,000 kilograms, power plant, TUA, Junkers Jumo 211J liquid-cooled inverted V12, 1,044 kilowatts each, performance, maximum speed, 510 km per hour at 5,300 m without external bomb racks or 433 km per hour at 4,500 m at 14,000 kilograms, range, 2,430 kilometers maximum internal fuel, service ceiling, 9,000 m at average weight, without bombs, rate of climb, 235 meters per minute, armament, guns, 1 7.92 mm MG81J machine gun on flexible mount in front windscreen, firing forward with 1,000 rounds. 1 7.92 mm MG81J machine gun on flexible mount in lower fuselage nose glazing, firing forward with 1,000 rounds. 2 7.92 mm MG81J machine guns on flexible mount in the rear of the cockpit canopy, firing aft with 1,000 rounds each. 1 7.92 mm MG81Z twin machine gun on flexible mount in the rear ventral bowler position, firing aft with 1,000 rounds. Bombs, up to 1,400 kilograms of ordnance internally in 2 bomb bays rated at 900 kg and 500 kg or up to 3,000 kg externally. Carrying bombs externally increased weight and drag and impaired the aircraft's performance. Carrying the maximum load usually required rocket-assisted takeoff. Armament options: additional option for a pair of 7.92 mm MG15 machine guns on flexible donut mountings firing laterally, one on each side of the cockpit canopy. A single 13 mm MG131 machine gun was sometimes used instead of the 7.92 mm MG81J or MG81Z machine guns in the A stand, B stand or ventral bowler positions. Aircraft may carry one 20 mm GFF cannon in the nose for ground attack purposes, with 90 rounds of ammunition, in place of the Luftwaffe 7 bomb sight, a modification of the Ju-88A4. The Ju-88A13 could mount the Waffen-Behar currency LTER WB-81A or WB-81B gun pods on the external bomb racks for ground attack duties, each watering can containing 3 7.92 mm G81Z twin machine guns, for strafing enemy troops. Specifications Ju-88G1, night fighter version. Data from General Characteristics, Crew, 3, Length, 15.50 meters, Wingspan, 20.08 m, Height, 5.07 m, Wing Area, 54.7 m2, Empty weight, 9,081 kilograms, Loaded weight, 13,100 kilograms, Max takeoff weight, 14,690 kilograms, Power plant, TUA, BMW 801G2 double-row radials, 1,250 kilowatts each. Performance, maximum speed, 550 km per hour at 8,500 m, range, 2,500 km, service ceiling, 9,900 m, wing loading, 240 kg per meter 2, power mass, 0.18 kilowatts per kilogram, endurance, 4 hours, armament, guns, 4 20 mm MG 151/20 cannons, firing forwards from an integral ventral gun pod. 1 or 2 13 mm MG 131 machine guns in the rear cockpit, firing rearwards. 1 or 2 20 mm MG 151 20th SS recurrency GE Music, firing forwards and upwards at an 30 to 45 degree angle, optional. Specifications Ju-88P3, heavily armed anti-tank and anti-bomber version. Data from General Characteristics, Crew, 3, Length, 14.85 meters, Wingspan, 20 m, Height, 4.85 m, Wing Area, 54.56 m2, Empty weight, c. 11,080 kilograms, Max takeoff weight, c. 12,670 kilograms, Power plant, TUA, Jumo 211J2 12-cylinder inverted V, 1,420 picoseconds each. Performance, maximum speed, 360 km per hour at 1,600 m, 5,250 feet, range, 1,580 km, service ceiling, c. 5,500 m, armament, guns, TUA, 37 mm Balkan BK3, 7 cannon in a conformal gun pod under the front fuselage, firing forwards, up to 6x 7.92 mm machine guns. See also, related development, Ju-188, Ju-388, Kyushu-Q1W, aircraft of comparable role, configuration and era, de Havilland Mosquito, Bristol Blenheim, Bristol Beaufighter, Pitliakov P2, Mitsubishi Ki-21, Yokosuka P-1Y, related lists, list of aircraft of World War II, list of military aircraft of Germany, list of bomber aircraft, references, notes. Citations. Bibliography. External links, The Ingenious Ju-88, Flight Magazine, 1940, www.ju88.net.